Hello Internet, so nice to see you. I want to tell you about that time when I realized that suspended fourth chords and suspended second chords and quartal chords are exactly the same thing. Now that's one of those useful things that help you a lot when you play music or when you write music, and these things is actually completely obvious to a number of people who have studied music theory, but it's a complete mystery for everybody else. So let me clarify and I'll show you why those things are different, why then they are actually the same at the end, and how we can use that. So first of all, what are all those chords? Well, let's start with a C major triad. A C major triad will have the notes C, E, and G. That's great, but we need only as a stepping stone to get to what we want to do, because we want to see what are suspended fourth chords. Well, what are suspended fourth chords? It's any major triad in which we substitute the middle note, which is the third, with a fourth. The fourth here will be the F note. So, when I play C, F, and G, I am playing a C suspended fourth. What about suspended second chord instead? Well, the procedure is similar. We start with a C major chord, we eliminate the middle note, and instead we write a second here, which is a D note. So if I play a C, D, and G, I am playing a C suspended second chord. All of that is fine and dandy, but what about quartal chords? Well, quartal chords are chords that work in a slightly different way than normal chords and are built by stacking fourths. What do I mean? Well, I start with the C note, then I go up a perfect fourth and I find an F note, and that's my next note in the chord. And then I go up another perfect fourth and I get a B flat note. And those three notes, C, F, B flat, are my C quartal chords. By the way, nobody will ever call these simply a C quartal, okay? Some people will just write these as a C seventh Sus4. And also, I built this chord using perfect fourths. Some people will actually follow the scale. So if we were in the key of C, my quartal chord would be CFB if I want to stay in the key of C. And the chord will sound in a slightly different way, or actually a lot different way. But in this moment, we're going to stay with the quartal chord built with just perfect fourths. Now, you look at those three chords and you're thinking, Tommaso, how are they the same? They are completely different. I mean, they have a certain sound quality that makes them similar by ear, but how are they the same? The notes are completely different. The only note they have in common is C, and that's because I started with C with all of them, so meaning not a great thing. How are they exactly the same? Well, let me show you. Let me change a little bit what I did so far. Let me write down those chords from different root and not from the same root. I'm going to keep C sus4 as it is, C, F, G. But rather than writing C sus2, I'm going to write F sus2. So I'm going to start with an F major chord, F, A, C, eliminate the middle note A, and then put the second in there, and the second is G. So my notes are F, G, C. And you can immediately see that F suspended second, F sus2, has exactly the same note as C suspended fourth, C sus4. They're just the inversion of each other, meaning that the lowest note of the chord is different. We just flip those notes around, but the notes are the same. What about the quartal chord? Rather than C quartal, let me write G quartal built only with perfect fourths. Well, the notes are going to be G, up a perfect fourth, C, up at perfect fourth, F. And again, the G quartal chord has exactly the same note as the C suspended fourth and the C suspended second. So all those chords have exactly the same note, and the only difference between them is that they are an inversion of each other, or if you want, that we consider a different note to be the root of the chord. Now, the question that you could have is, does it make sense to give those three chords three different names when they are in fact the same chord, the same thing, because they have the same note? Well, yes, there is a sense. But first of all, you have to remember that the music notation, the chord notation, has not been designed by people. We didn't sit down with a big committee of musicians all over the world and say, okay, let's design a chord notation that works. No, the notation simply emerged by working musicians working in different countries, in different languages, that didn't know each other, well before we had the internet that would have allowed us to communicate and fight to the death to decide the correct notation. So as it happened, different musicians in different places have called those chords in different ways simply because they did not know about other people calling this chord in another way. Or if they knew, they didn't care. Or if they knew and cared, they just found one notation to be more convenient than the other because that specific notation was giving them more the sound that they liked. And indeed, you will notice that in different styles we are using preferentially one of those three names and it's not the same. In classical music, for instance, it's much more common to talk about suspended fourth chords rather than suspended second or quartal chords, simply because it's much more common to play those chords with that note at the bass. And indeed, it's a very typical thing to do, to play, for instance, a C major, followed by a G Sus4, followed by a G, followed by another C major. In jazz, instead, it's much more common to talk about quartal chords. With much more common, I do not mean that we talk only about quartal chord and we never talk about suspended fourth and suspended second. I'm just saying that most of the time when we use those notes, we put them together in a way similar to the quartal order, because it sounds more jazzy, if you want, than the other ways of putting it together. And so it's naturally we're using this name quartal more than the other names. And indeed, if you hear a few quartal chords playing one after the other, you can totally hear how they sound jazzy. This is C quartal followed by D quartal, followed by A quartal, followed by E quartal. The suspended second name is less used in classical and in jazz. It's a bit more common in modern rock and metal. Of course, in modern rock and metal, we also talk a lot about suspended fourth chords, so it's not the most common name, but it's used much more in, let's say, more recent and modern music as opposed to classical music or jazz. And again, I do not mean to say at all that musicians in a style do not know about those names, and definitely your experience could be different than mine, but in my experience, Sus4 is more used in classical as a name, quartal is more used in jazz, and suspended second is more used in modern rock and metal. The interesting thing, though, is that those three chords are actually the same chord. Every shape you know on the guitar for the suspended chord, it's also a suspended second chord, and it's also a quartal chord, etc., etc. So even if you know only one of those three chords, you actually know all the three chords. When you're learning your chord shapes all over the fretboard, little tricks like that save you a lot of time, because when you are studying your suspended fourth chords, at the same time you could be studying your Sus2 chord and your quartal chords without doing any extra effort, just knowing that any shape you study here, it's also shaped for those two things here. And hey, if you can learn the same thing in 1/3 of the time, why shouldn't you? Music theory is full of those tricks that allow you to learn a lot of things in a short amount of time and then change the music to your liking by substituting those chords for each other in these or more inventive ways. If you want to know more about how to do this on your guitar, I have a course called Complete Chord Mastery that does all of this for you. Complete Chord Mastery, it's not a book. It's a complete video course that takes you from the basics up. We do everything you need to know about harmony and chords on your guitar. All the theory is done straight on the fretboard. There is no theory for the sake of theory here. Everything is immediately practical and everything is developed through exercises so you know how to apply these immediately on your guitar. If you have just a minute, click on the link on the top right to check out Complete Chord Mastery. If you like this video, smash on that like button and don't forget to subscribe and click on notification, otherwise YouTube will not let you know when I put up a new video. And if you have any comment, feedback, suggestions, write them down in the comment. I enjoy reading from you and I make videos on your suggestions. This is Tommaso Zillia of musictheoryforguitar.com, and until next time, enjoy!